In this edition of Jay's Corner podcast, we've got Suzanne Norman, very interesting person with a wealth of experience in the financial services industry. So important to include women on the conversation about personal finance. A lot of times the administrative tasks are handed to the responsible adult female. I'm not going to change all bias in the world today. Let's hear what she has to say. Welcome to Jay's Corner. My name is Jay O. I am the certified financial planner. I'm also the author of Maximize Your Medicare, the published book. Jay's Corner is there to try to explain how certain financial matters work, to try to help you separate the signal from the noise, so that when something changes, you're not distracted wrongly, and instead keep your eyes on the ball, which is tough to do given the way that we are given information. There's a free and paid newsletter. Go to jo.substack.com. There are 2 YouTube channels, Jay's Corner as well as Maximize Your Medicare. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you digest your podcast. Be sure to leave your comments. Let's begin. Welcome to Jay's Corner. Today, we've got a special guest, Suzanne Norman. Now, Suzanne has a lot of industry experience in financial services. And in addition to that, she fills a number of different roles, very interesting to the message here, and women's role in all walks of life. And so I'm going to ask her and pick her brain here today. Good morning, Suzanne. Welcome to Jay's Corner.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So before I hit record, we talked about your background and fascinating decades in financial services and relating to different types of organizations. Why don't you give us just a brief look about your past professional experience?
Sure. Thanks, Jay. People who've heard me speak over the years know that I often say that I got into this industry on purpose by accident. And why I say it that way is my undergraduate degree was in psychology, and I actually took a little kind of side trip to photography after college. But what I was looking for when I moved out to San Francisco is some income stability. And having always been a worker bee, and just knowing that, I have to have income flow versus just sort of bringing my photography book around, a friend arranged for me to take a temp job at Wells Fargo Securities. And I laugh because I always knew Wells Fargo with the wagons. And
right.
So if you can imagine my view, not having had any type of education in the markets, I showed up the first day and I said, oh, well, okay, this is not a security brinks kind of truck job. And what it turned out to be, of course, is a brokerage role. And the woman that I worked with encouraged me after about a week because she heard me on the phones and she knew I was personable. And she said, have you ever thought about being in this industry and this job? And after about a day or so, the whisper in me said, I'm supposed to know her. I'm just going to trust that this is the right, decision. What's there to lose? I did have to get my Series 7 very quickly. So that was actually a great baptism by fire. So I got that in about a month. So I'm proud to say. And she's still one of the best friends that I have, in the world. And so that got me into the industry. And basically my journey took me from, San Francisco, a little side trip to Syracuse where I joined Merrill Lynch. And that was a wonderful opportunity. I was with Merrill Lynch almost 12 years. A little advisory there. But also I rolled into and seeked out a role as a specialist. So that was somebody who managed a product line and served the financial advisors. So some people in the industry know that term, but it was much more B2B. I did a lot of training for clients, but that was really my passion, is sort of specializing. And so that was actually in the insurance group. Then I actually moved to AllianceBernstein, very similar role, working in the sub-advisory division. So we had institutional clients, also serving the insurance needs. And then my final career job for almost 9 years was at Milliman. And at Milliman Financial Risk Management Group, again, very similar. I led a team. And we worked again in the sub-advisory space and all about risk management. And that's really my passion.
Everyday people have heard the first couple, right? Wells, certainly, and Merrill, AllianceBernstein to some degree, but Milliman is not well known to the everyday person. very technical firm based, if you will, probability and statistics driven firm.
Yeah.
And I read one of your papers about that you were a co-author about women and their role. And obviously you spoke earlier from your first job at Wells. I always tell young people, I'm like, no matter how smart, no matter how creative you are, you need a rabbi, meaning a person to kind of help you, encourage you, support you, and things like that. And now, today, you're doing different things from, the normal corporate roles, established corporate roles that you've had. Talk to me now about coaching and women, and about this paper, if you could, and your observations from that paper and your own personal experience.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It almost seemed inevitable that I would get back probably to my roots of psychology, and people would always laugh for years, 30 years in financial services. You have a degree in psychology?
Right.
Clearly, I'm good at math too. But the point is that a friend encouraged me to go and get my coaching certificate. And growing up with a feminist mother in a very, in the 70s, let's say, women's rights. I was swimming in it. And I also went to a women's college. So women's empowerment and, the friendships that I've made, the female tribes, you talk about rabbi, so my friend is Margarita Perry, and she's one of my major rabbis in life. She's, 40-year practitioner. But what I really recognized with getting that coaching certificate was that there's a way for me to kind of take, my life experience and, having a lived experience as a woman in financial services.
Absolutely.
Made me pretty resilient, as you probably know. We're a small percentage, which is funny. I always talk about, how are we the majority of the population? It's still a minority in some of these industries. But anyway, obviously I enjoyed the industry. But I knew that I could take some of the skills, or a lot of the skills that I had in my life experience, apply some of the training as a coach, and then bring that to women. And most of the women I work with are like me, where, they may still be in their careers, but there's a longing for that sense of purpose. And some work that I've done, you talk about I'm not sure which paper you're referencing. I wrote a lot. I did a leadership program at Yale, which really inspired me, since there wasn't anything that we had on the shelf, so to speak, at Milliman. I like to write. So actually, it was a great opportunity for me while I was there to start building that library and inviting some other female colleagues that were in different divisions and different practices to collaborate with me. So really, it's all about empowering women. So that could be that it's through the mentorship that I do with First to College. It's, the financial literacy education that I do. And the coaching, again, is for women that are, in transition, looking for that. I've got another 30 years coming. My kids are out of the house, or I'm almost an empty nester. What's my role in life? And I love having that kind of co-pilot role as a coach to help women find their way.
It's a lot. I mean, at that point in life, and, I think that my own book, Maximize Your Medicare, has succeeded to some degree to the persons who are Medicare's coming up in a year, 2 years, right? I need to know, they don't understand something. I need to get some information. But the reality is that sometimes it comes to Suzanne's on her stack of the many stacks, as not Suzanne the professional, but Suzanne the person, right? In other words, we're not going to solve gender bias here on this on our podcast today, right?
We could be more gender aware.
Okay,
is one thing I talk about. Yes, but I agreed.
Right. So, in the absence of a complete, resolution to all bias, the fact of the matter is that I've observed, and I've told this to people in public. Well, the responsibility ends up on the responsible female of the extended family. I mean, that's kind of your practical reality of the situation. So now we've got your very interesting intersection, right? Technically professional experience, and yet everyday life experience, which is back into, if you will, okay, Suzanne, you're the sandwich generation female, highly educated, lots of professional experience.
here's this new language. Can you help me out on all this other stuff? And now all of a sudden you're the extended family expert.
Yeah.
Talk about the layers of, stress that adds. I mean, it's got to be stressful. You've got these different responsibilities put on your desk, whether you wanted it or not.
Yeah, yeah. And I now know which paper you're referencing. We wrote a very expensive sandwich. That was with my colleagues Sheila
There you
Jellick
go.
and Janet Jennings from the healthcare practice that I'd met, who brought a wealth of information to it. So certainly I encourage people to read the paper. I know it's a little probably longer than the summary, but the point being here, as you say, I often say with that financial wellness, financial fitness, that it's not it would be nice to have, it's a need to have, because you just referenced it. I don't know that it's necessarily always gender based, but if I look at my friends, both male and female, we could talk for hours, and you as well, about all of the women that we know that are taking care of themselves, their children, and their parents. I mean, just, yesterday I'm at a book club dinner, and talking about all these journeys that women have been on, and navigating, one of them was talking about, being a power of attorney. And when the mother died, there is no power of attorney anymore because there is no person. So, how do you navigate the banking system? How do you give care? And one of the stats that I shared in the paper that I talk about a lot is that imbalance, if you will, where we see women leaving the workforce for about 5.5 years to care for their children, whereas men are leaving about half a year. And then you look at parents, where women are leaving the workforce for a little over almost 2 years, and men, again, almost, a little over half a year. And what's the impact there, on not only their emotional well-being, but their financial well-being? And,
For sure.
And one of the things I mentioned, or I highlight, Jay, because if someone is still working, one of the ahas, and I had this years ago with a friend who was going through this, it was her husband's parents that she was helping. But there's that employee assistant program that became much more robust in general during COVID. And there are amazing, and it was in the paper, but there are amazing resources available for free, where, you could reach out to that program, and usually a company will pay, for another company's programming. But the point is that you could find, a adult daycare, you could help find a, nursing home, assisted living. And so the point is, I guess, that it's also being aware of the resources that are available to you.
Do you find that the large employers are offering this, in mass? Is this generally the case? Is this exceptional one-off? How prevalent is that kind of service?
It's a good question, and I don't have a specific answer. My sense is, knowing how robust the plan was at Milliman when I was there, and when we started digging into it, and I credit our HR professional for sending this out during COVID, and just, in writing the paper and really reviewing all of the things, the legal help that you get. So my sense is that an even bigger public firm would have it, but it may not always be something that you're aware of, because there may not be a lot of kind of marketing behind it. So it's one of those, you don't ask, you don't get, and also being curious.
Sure.
Yeah.
So from a practical point of view, let's just say it's your cloned sister, if you will. How do they they decide to transition from a professional work life, or can be that family circumstance dictates to them? What are their first steps that they need to think through from Suzanne's point of view? And, the whiteboard is clear here, Suzanne, so I'm sure that one solution is not going to fit every person, but let's talk about just general principles from your perspective on what a female in that situation needs to command first.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And we actually just wrote about this. I work as an education fellow for not-for-profit that you were participating in a podcast recently for the Alliance for Lifetime Income.
Sure.
And I wrote something recently about the money happiness formula. So I'd like to sort of start off by saying that this is gender neutral. But the money happiness formula, which you probably know, although you're so sophisticated, it's probably too simple for you.
No.
but it's income greater than expenses. And if you can keep that in your mind, and we do this in financial literacy education all the time, adult financial literacy education, but it kind of reduces it to something like, oh, right, okay, I don't want a deficit. Certainly there could be some good debt out there, but the point I make is that you need to know where the income is coming from in order, and your expenses. So another kind of, aha for people is, I ask a lot, do you have a budget? And as you probably know, statistically, most people don't. And, and if they say yes, then, we have stats around, well, do you follow it? So I also talk to women, and again, this applies to men, about that 50-30-20 formula, which you may have seen before, but 50% of what is coming into you is going to your essentials, right? So those are your needs. That's your mortgage, your utilities, your groceries, all of the things that, it costs to run your life. 30% wants, right? Because again, what is life, as we're sort of talking about, if it can't be joyful and happy. And then 20%, and this is sort of getting a little closer to answering your question, which is, that is the rainy day fund. That is the savings. That is the investments. So when I, think about women in transition, I want to level set with those concepts, because wanting to transition into something that gives you joy, gives you, a sense of purpose, has a cost to it, right? So it's that analysis of where do I stand right now, as far as income and what I need.
So, and this is why I wanted to have you here, right? Because you also have insight from an everyday perspective, from retail, et cetera, and some idea, not only that, but what other advisors know or don't know. Mm-hmm. How much time do you think that the financial services industry dedicates to that first stop? Or are they right into the minutia of their particular product or their particular, stated, role and expertise, whether it's stockbroker, annuity salesperson, life insurance agent? Do you think that the first conversation that you just stated there is, adequately had, or do you think that we assume that the person knows that the client, the prospect, already knows this before meeting with a financial professional?
Yeah,
what's your view?
It's such an important question, Jay, because you don't know what you don't know. And because we as a country are pretty much left to our own devices to learn financial skills, because the Council of Economic Education publishes a report every year how many states actually require a class in personal finance or economics, and it's dismal. It's about 23 states. So most people that you talk to say, yeah, I learned it on my own. But when it comes to advice, this is still, I think, the next frontier of awareness, because if you are an average, you asked me to clone myself. Okay. So now I'm going to have my twin sister, I don't know, we'll call her, actually, my name was supposed to be Noelle. So I'm going to call her Noelle. My parents changed at the last minute. So I'm going to say that Noelle, who doesn't have any background in, financial services, advice, does a good job of saving, is, adhering to the money happiness formula, but now has to hire an advisor or seek advice, because obviously there's a lot online right now. So there is the ability to DIY it. But let's just say that you're in the cohort that says, I want an advisor. You have no idea what questions to ask. Typically, right? The opaqueness of how much things cost, how much an advisor charges. So I encourage people, to do a little bit of sleuthing, and there are definitely resources out there. You make me think now that I probably should put this on my website. It is on the Alliance's website as far as how to interview a financial advisor. But I do think that, coming to your question about, let's say that I'm ready to start interviewing. I have the questions. I know how to ask, what got you into the business? I've done a background check on you. I know that you don't have a lot of, hopefully none, but, there aren't any customer complaints, because that's, of course, public information. But the point is, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, is often said about the advice industry. Meaning, if I am an investment professional and Noelle comes in to talk to me, if what I love to do is I love to track the markets and I love to pick the best investments, and that's great. I mean, you need that. But will that necessarily put me in a mindset of saying, what is Noelle's, my alter ego, what's her goal? What's her objective? Because I think sometimes that narrowness does happen in the industry. With that said, there are so many professionals that I think have taken the time to get their certified financial planning, training and certificate. They're much more planning based. So when they meet Noelle, they want to know everything about Noelle. But I do see those two camps, maybe that certified financial planner or planning based financial advisor as still being a little smaller in the industry, because if you look at the stats, and I'm sure you have, reports tend to still say that less than 10% of the retail financial client is actually doing a formal plan. So what does that mean? Does that mean they said, I don't want to do one? Or does that mean that the advisors that they're working with are saying, I'm your investment person?
And what percent? And of course, we're speculating. Yes. We're going to try not to cross the line into reckless speculation, but let's just speculate.
Yeah. No. Prudent.
It is. So now you've come to your advisor. They're stating, look, we're here to help you with your investment portfolio, what it would be. Suzanne or Noelle has, 10 different issues on her mind, all which affect financial matters. Maybe she's used to it and has had 2 decades of experience, right, as an adult. Mm-hmm. Maybe that was left to a partner, an ex-partner, whatever type of role. And now all of a sudden she's got to get, the investment advisor is one out of a list of 10 different items. Mm. Is that priority set correctly by Noelle? In other words, you're advising Noelle. What order are we talking about these different issues from your perspective? What advice, what guidance? And I'm kind of trying to tease out what Suzanne, Noelle comes to Suzanne, and is Suzanne smart like Suzanne, but does want to transition? What should she be asking Suzanne? What should Noelle really be asking first? Yeah. Because the Merrills of the world, and nothing against Merrill Lynch, right? I mean, the advisors, the advertisements are every day, newspapers, online, whatever it would be. Everyone knows who it is. You got CNBC and moving tickers. Mm-hmm. But it's still just 1 out of 10. So really, I'm asking about how, from your perspective, how far down the list, or is it just at the top of the list and it dominates everything?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because, getting back to coaching, the key question is, what do you want? And coaching is helping flesh that out, of course. But your example is Noelle comes in and says, it's time. I am done being an attorney. I want to do something else that's meaningful to me, that's going to give me purpose. Making sure that Noelle is on that strong financial footing is the most important thing, meaning that how much money do you have? And let's do a projection. Now, I think we can start with a Monte Carlo, and again, not loving that language that we've applied in the industry for that kind of, probability. And I know you're a probability guy, but that probability based, forward look into the future, what are the odds with, my asset, investment level, with the income that I may or may not have? Because again, let's say you're like me, you're making this transition pivot before 65, the classic kind of, I'm 56, almost 57, hence the Noelle. I'm a holiday child. But the point is, running those numbers so that Noelle can see, you have X amount of money, which depending on when you want to draw it, which you might want to draw an income from your investments. You might want to take the principal, or excuse me, maybe not principal, but you might want to take the interest, the dividends, systematic withdrawal, whatever. But, how much money do you have? And what's your lifestyle need? And what, because if that shift that women are looking to make has income potential, what will that income look like so that you actually are able to sustain your lifestyle? So I guess the bottom line I always say is we need to know all the numbers, right? How much money do you have? How much do you think you could make in this transition? It could be that you've accumulated enough wealth that you could just be a volunteer. You could do anything, right?
Nice.
But I don't know that nice, right? The average American isn't in that position, right?
Sure.
So I think it's,
No,
you know what, Jay, it's a reality check conversation, right? Because again, there's a lot of wishing that happens in life, and certainly money. But I think the role of a good financial professional is, being that truth teller and having the reality check.
And now we are here today. If we not fast forward, this has always been the case, but the numbers are now enormous, right? 15%, something like that, just as a general healthcare costs out of your 100, right? In national GDP. So I ask guests very frequently, underrated, overrated, properly rated, as far as people's knowledge and awareness of how big that number is and how much it affects their financial plan amongst this list of 10.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, is the information that we have delivered to people good, bad, or terrible? I mean, is really, adequate?
I'm going to say bad. I feel bad I would hate to say terrible, but it's between the two, only because back to awareness, right? Because the modern financial advisory industry, right, that's grown, considerably, obviously, since ERISA, and having much more participation in investing markets. But the point is that healthcare was always sort of a purview of someone else, right? It wasn't necessarily something that a financial advisor, that's the stocks and bonds person, right? So the awareness, I think, is dismal. And I think the industry is doing a much better job. The challenge is that, as you just made a comment with percentages, and I always like to bring it to dollars, right? Because dollars really tell the story. And you'll know the number far better than I will as far as what that healthcare spending looks like as far as our GDP. But I'll bring it down to a number that we used in our paper on that expensive sandwich, which was that a 45-year-old woman retiring at 65 could expect to spend out of pocket on average $265,000. And so I let that sit with people sometimes. It's daunting. Right, because 206 out of pocket. Wait, I have Medicare. I bought Medigap. I have Medicare Advantage. Whatever plan you opt for. Getting old can be expensive, and for women in particular. And I should say that number obviously is an estimate, right? It's averages, of course, average. But I will note that because we live longer. And we do tend to have more complicated systems with, reproductive, issues, whatnot. It can be more expensive for us than men to age.
Do you think that we are doing a good job? And I put me, so I'm throwing a rock at myself, or a mud ball at myself, are doing a good job of helping people understand this earlier? Because by the time that they've gotten to, Noelle's age, right, a fair amount of information has been ingrained. They've been educated or, not educated, whichever may be, put off perhaps. Is it too late at that point in time? Or, how early, I guess my real question is how do we jumpstart Noelle's knowledge base? This first conversation will do it, or are there other steps?
Well, it's interesting tying together something we talked about a little bit ago, and that is that lived experience of being in the sandwich generation. So in the case of Noelle, which, by the way, I should confess, one of my best friends is named Noelle. Okay. So if she's listening to this, she's going to think I'm talking about her, which I actually sort of am right now.
Okay.
Because most women, and again, some men, but because they are caring for their parents, right, and elder relatives, whomever, I have a friend who volunteers and just does a million things for just neighbors. But the point is helping them navigate when they get to 65. So if I'm in my 40s, or even 50s and helping, my parents navigate, there is a little bit learning that's happening there. It's not really real time in the sense of you're not getting a scope of the total spend, But as far as, where you have expertise, and that is, navigating, how do I enroll in Medicare? I learned something great from you the other day, which is, you better start scoping this out like at 63 or a little bit earlier. But I do believe that there's some awareness, maybe a lot, that women are getting from helping their parents navigate Medicare.
I've seen these articles, and we kind of know this anecdotally. So back to kind of what we were saying, well, now Noelle's got 10 plates to spin, a long list. How much of the time, or are there different roles, different thoughts, different process? A person has to stop working because family, women particularly, right? Taking care of senior parents-in-law, whatever it would be, extended family member, they have to stop working.
Yep.
And now and then they have to question, okay, am I going to go back to work? Am I going to have to stay here, not working? Or how am I going to balance? How's this stuff going to work?
Yeah.
Is this also well flushed out? Or why don't you give your perspective on what a woman and extended family can do? Because everyone's getting older, ourselves included. Hold on, Suzanne. Hold on. Something happened with the sound? Can you hear me okay? Okay, let's just see. I don't know what happened. It can be that, and I'm not sure what the source is here. It can be internet related. Let's just shut some stuff down, see what happens.
So I think we were just talking about self-care is not selfish.
Exactly. Yep. Right.
And one of the things that we stressed in the paper that we wrote was recognizing that, there are boundaries. There is the ability to delegate. And we talked a little bit earlier about, maybe you have a program that you're not aware of through your company. Maybe you have a sibling. I think one of the things that I've learned from my friends, I'm very fortunate. My parents are 83 and 80. I often say, look, probably 10 years younger, maybe 15. They act like they're 18. I'm very lucky. But I've learned vicariously through my friends and how they manage that.
Sure.
One of the tips that I've seen work quite well is, let's say you do have other siblings. Now, the geography, obviously, default is closest female is always going to be the caregiver, right? But recognizing that, you can have a schedule. One of my friends will fly up from Virginia to see her mother to help her sister out because her sister is in the neighborhood. But having that ability to really ask for what you need and recognize that this care that you're giving, and that's true for an elderly spouse as well, takes a toll physically.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Beyond
absolutely.
the mental and the financial, right? So I guess it's being aware of boundaries, knowing that you can ask for help and that you don't have to do it all. And sometimes that I know is easier said than done, but recognizing that there are people out there that want to help.
When a person takes time off, let's just say, for example, Noelle has, we've got a family situation, responsible female we need to take some time off from work to attend to it. From your experience, and I'm sure this is part of the salary gap, one of these things that we're not going to, resolve here on the call, but talk about, the decision-making of returning to work or not, and uncertainty about how their handle of finances can affect that decision making.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's, I guess I'm hearing that there's a binary nature to it, meaning that the care, maybe that's a question to clarify. The care that's required is requiring 100% of Noelle's time, or is this Noelle's just going to be the classic doer female and say, I'm going to work full time, I'm going to take care of my kids, and I'm going to drive, my friend Noelle's example, an hour and a half each way to go visit my mother in her care facility.
It's an interesting point. It just points out my own bias, right? Because you're absolutely right. I framed the question as it's just like 0 or 100. I didn't really consider some different levels or different balances. Is it your thought that that's even possible to be like 75-25, or in your experience, look at people just decide, okay, I can't work at all because I need 100% and then 10% rest or do it self-care, etc.
Right.
How is that?
Yeah, I think in what I've observed that most women try to just put it into their normal day. I know of one friend that decided she had a very, important, stressful, executive role in a big company. Her parents were getting sick, and she decided to step away and said, that's my job. I'm not married. She was older, not married, no kids, and said, that's what I'm going to do. Now, Jay, forgive me one sec. Can you pause the recording?
Oh, no problem.
Thank you. I have somebody who wants to join the conversation. I'm going to try
and actually, they're welcome to the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So she had decided that was, it was in getting back to coaching and values, right? So her value system said, this is my role. I can do this. Now, her story is interesting because she stepped away from this executive role, moved, probably about an hour away from Boston, and took care of her parents. And because she was very valued in her company, they said, we want you back. And so she actually, this is adding, back to the story of, okay, I'll do both. I will commute an hour each way to work. I will take care of my aging, ailing parents. But it's something that she wanted to do and she could do. I see some work in the coaching mode of saying, okay, what's important to you? And if that's one of your values, is giving back and being a caregiver for ailing parents, what else interests you out there? Because could you take a part-time job? I mean, if that becomes your full-time job, but you still want to be engaged and earn some income, which I would say in some, family situations, if the parents have, accumulated a significant amount of wealth, you can be paid for care. I have another friend whose sister did that, where the trust would pay her. But getting back to this binary nature, I don't see it as often when someone is the primary caregiver. So if you're fortunate enough to be married and the spouse is earning a strong income, I think that's maybe a scenario that I see also where the wife can step away. But it really comes down to being, I think, back to coaching, very clear on what's important to you. Because if this is, I have to do this, I don't want to do this, it's going to take a toll, not only mentally, but financially.
And that's why I was asked that question in that way, is that part of that can be financial uncertainty, then kind of driving then a decision that may not have been what in line necessarily with their values or whatever they think that they should do or want to do, if you will, and then shifting, their decision, and back to your taking, honest stock of where you stand. Where is the money? Where is it going? How's it actually work? Do we have a plan going forward so that they can know what decision that they're taking? I mean, your friend is an exception, right? I mean, high powered, highly accomplishment, highly, achievement, and obviously high valued employee. So as a result, we'll figure out the middle ground.
Exactly.
That's not most employee. I mean, most everyday persons, don't have that luxury, unfortunately. And while there can be changes and evolutions to the employment, situation, do you think that, or what advice would you give? What guidance would you have? And you probably already touched on it, but is there something special, extra that you think that people could use as far as information as they decide on, their proper balance?
Yeah. You brought a couple thoughts together from what we just talked about before, which is, I think that can be an incredibly powerful important role of a financial advisor.
Mm.
And that is someone who is committed and trained to help a client, Noelle in this case, have early conversations with
Yeah.
her parent or parents. Because one of the things the conversations happen all day, every day. And maybe it's just, again, my age, but everyone's dealing with this, it seems like, with parents.
For sure.
But I talked to someone the other day who was struggling. Fortunately, there's a fair amount of money in the family, so it's not necessarily a cost situation, but it's the emotions, because her father is divorced, is ailing, and does not want to move closer to where she is, where she could give him oversight and care, again, in a lovely facility. But the point is that the conversation didn't happen, it sounds like, maybe when they were younger and there was more clarity, because some of these decisions that are being, that you're navigating with a parent, and one of my consultant colleagues, Chris Hay, says, I guess Harvard has calculated that our mental competency kind of peaks at 56.
Is
Which,
that right?
kind of a scary number. By the way, yes, my age. But the point I guess I'm making is that I think that's a really interesting role that a financial advisor could step into, knowing the financial consequences, especially with women. If you can guide someone, Noelle, to have a conversation early to get some kind of planning happening with the parents, sort of like, what's my role going to be? What are my siblings' roles going to be? Where do you want to live? Because if the parents aren't having those conversations with anyone, arming, I think, someone, woman, especially in her, 50s, that could be very powerful as a role, with a financial advisor, and, being curious independently, right? Like, how do I help my parents help themselves?
And then for themselves later as well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they've, especially in the sandwich generation, they know it can happen, or sometimes that's the catalyst. Oh, take care of my senior parent is going to cost X. I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea what X even was. No idea.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a support system, how are they going to think through it? And do they have any contingency backup plan in terms of, if I can't take care of myself now, there's another issue that they've got to consider, which they didn't necessarily know even existed as an issue. So
Mm-hmm.
I always call the long-term care planning conversation as the elephant in the room, because it's the conversation nobody wants to have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you don't want to face your own mortality, much
Mm-hmm.
less that your parents would possibly not be there any longer, or just not in the state. And then how do you talk to your people around you? Okay, what are we going to actually do? Because it's nice to say, well, my family, we're all going to pitch in,
Mm-hmm.
or, we're all going to make it work and things like that. But then you ask, I've had this conversation. Okay, well, that's great. Now tell me, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
And then
Write it down. Let's write a business plan, right? I mean, because that's it. Again, it's up here. And unless it's written down, whether it's through a formal financial plan, or like you're saying, just having those conversations and saying, okay, we're documenting this. This is the plan. But you just flagged something, Jay, which I'm assuming whoever is listening knows this, but just again, Medicare doesn't cover long-term care, especially for women who tend to claim more. It's in our, we wrote this in our paper as well, but, women, have longer stays. There are more claims. We live longer, and not having that conversation about where you want to live, because again, this, most people say, I want to live in my house. Right. And what's that look like if you're living 500 miles away, 1,000 miles away from someone who has some oversight? Yeah.
It is, and even person with our background, right? You would think, okay, well, the conversation is easier for me to have because I have this background and I have all this different experience, et cetera, and know what the cost ramifications. That doesn't make it any more pleasant, mm-hmm. or a conversation. So It's so interesting that someone, and without putting myself in your shoes, I mean, this based on your professional work, the research you've done, the papers you've written. I'm sure it's just not that easy for any person. I mean, unless
the
you're,
emotions, right?
of
I
course,
mean, because
right.
it's all, kind of left hemisphere, I can be clinical, we can have the conversation, we can write it down. But, I mean, the worst or most extreme example in this is someone was talking about this just the other day of, having that healthcare proxy, and I was curious because the person that had been picked was a friend,
Mm,
because the person who is ailing knew that the husband wouldn't be able to pull the plug.
right.
So these are, I guess I'm, using an extreme example here, but it just
Sure. No,
gets to the
I do it all the
emotions
time.
around mortality, and people are not comfortable with this, even, though I think our awareness has been raised a lot through the pandemic.
Suzanne, how do people get a hold of you today? We could go on for hours, literally,
Sure.
because there's so many stones on this rocky beach, and underneath each stone is an hour conversation. I mean, literally. But how do people get started with you? Why don't you tell us, how people can get in contact with you?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, SuzanneNorman.com,
Okay.
which I think we'll have in the crawl. And my calendar is in there, resources are in there, and talking to me for a consult is free. So anything that's on your mind, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to help.
And I wanted to have you here because, I can always say, well, Jay's a financial planner, I can do everything and this and that, but different people have different comfort levels with other persons. That's a personal conversation. And I think that, Suzanne, you represent, both the technically, specifically in financial markets, in financial advisory, you understand at least the topics of issues. And then plus the fact that you've got your own personal experience and add that's a pretty powerful combination of stuff, technical term, for technician stuff, right?
Common language.
Right. That's why I think, our conversation here is so important, so welcoming, and especially, to reach out to her if that is the type of situation you face. And a lot of the topics are not gender specific, right? We happen to focus on women today, but taking proper stock, well, whether or not that's happening, I don't think that it discriminates. We're not necessarily fully educated, irrespective of, gender, sex. So,
well, and Jay, you made me think one thing that I failed to mention, but it's a perfect segue with our last comments around, having this competency on the numbers and the logic, but then getting into the messiness of the emotions. I am actually starting a new program in January to help women around their emotions with money and getting mental fitness around that. Because again, I'm not an advisor. That's not the role that I choose to play in the world. But that's important work, I think, for a lot of people is getting strong.
Super important, because I think we were talking earlier, and we'll end here, which is that we are given information within a silo, right? Invest for the long term, life insurance for security, annuities for, for lifetime income, but the interactions, and then there's you overlaying how you can manage what is important to you in order so that you can set a priority list for these different topics, people being hit from every direction. But your point about the emotions, so important, and we'll look forward to that. And yes, any place that our conversation is going to be shared, we'll be sharing your links, as widespread as we possibly can. So
thanks, Jay.
All right, Suzanne, thank you very much.